The platform groaned under her bare feet. She didn't move. Cold tea. The sack over her face clung with sweat, thick with flour dust, and inside it her breath came shallow and fast. Her hands were tied in front of her with barn rope, frayed and biting just below the swell of her belly. "My baby is coming," she whispered, though no one leaned close enough to hear it. Laughter rose around her like smoke from a brush fire. Someone made a comment about used goods. Another about early delivery. One of the younger boys, voice breaking, shouted, "She don't look worth much, uncle." The man beside him chuckled, but didn't correct him. Temperance felt her knees sway. The wood beneath her felt like gallows. She wondered dimly if this was worse than a hanging. At least hangings were quick. This was slow and public and worse legal. She heard the auctioneer clear his throat. He wasn't standing beside her, but behind. Cobran. Next up, one temperamental widow. 9 months and near done, he called, voice like gravel soaked in molasses. Strong hips, strong lungs, and a plenty of experience. Property of the Callahans. By widow's law, she's theirs. Comes with no dowry, no dignity, and no say. Someone clapped. Another whistled. Temperance turned her face slightly beneath the sack. No light came through. Her breath fogged it humid and sour. The baby shifted inside her. A quiet ripple of life beneath the wreckage of a name she no longer bore. She felt the wood tremble again. From behind, a pair of shoes stepped up to the platform. Hard leather, sharp soles. Not the boots she once knew. These were Oedia Callahan's, her brother-in-law. She could smell his pipe smoke, the kind that made her nauseous long before pregnancy. "Tell him why you're here, Tempe," he said loud and false sweet. "Tell him how you tried to keep my brother's land and refused to marry proper again. Tell him how you disgraced us with your attitude and laziness." Her silence infuriated him. It always had. She felt him step closer like he might tear the sack off and show them what shame looked like, but he didn't. No, he liked her faceless. More manageable that way. Someone in the crowd called, "How far along is she?" 8.5, Abodius said quickly. "But might be sooner. Sis always been dramatic." Temperance shifted her weight, but the rope around her wrists tightened when she moved. She heard snickering. Even the women didn't defend her. A few of them, she knew had shared her tea once, had borrowed salt from her kitchen. Now they muttered about her condition and whether the baby had the right nose. Farther back, someone hadn't moved. She felt it before she saw it. Presence pill heavy. She couldn't see through the sack, but she heard it. One breath, steady, different, lower than the rest. She imagined it came from a tall man. Someone not shifting his weight or elbowing others. Used wedding. The auctioneer began again. Opening bid 4 pesos. A bid. Silence. 350, the baby moved again. A sharp elbow to her ribs. She winced and bit the inside of her cheek to keep from crying out. The pain grounded her. So did the shame. 2. Any takers for 2? Oadia muttered something under his breath. She heard boots scuff and "I'll take her." A voice deep as a canyon but calm as shade. The crowd rustled. Temperance heard the wood steps creak. One man climbed onto the platform. He didn't speak again, didn't haggle, didn't explain. He just walked forward. She braced herself for his touch. A hand grabbing her arm, maybe jerking her down to show ownership. But what came instead was gentler than memory. He put one hand, large, calloused, warm, on the small of her back and guided her forward. The other hand found hers, curled around the rope, and didn't pull. He unwound it slowly, one loop at a time. The crowd hushed. When her hands were free, she didn't know what to do with them. She expected him to pull the sack away. He didn't. He bent slightly. He was tall, she realized, and swept her up into his arms as if she were made of paper and fire both. Her swollen belly rested against his chest. Her breath caught. He walked down the steps with her through the parted crowd who said nothing now. Not a soul stopped him. Obadiah's voice cut through. "That's theft. That's not a purchase without coin. The man didn't break stride. But behind him, a coin rang against the wood. A silver dollar tossed loud. Temperance heard it spin. The man carrying her said nothing, just held her like something sacred. Her face was still covered, but in his arms she smelled earth and tobacco and something like pine sap and smoke. Her head rested against his chest and through the cloth she heard his heartbeat. Steady, he walked past the wagons, the well, the children staring in silence. He walked until the dirt turned to dry grass, past fences in need of mending, past old prayer flags nailed to a sycamore. He stopped once, just once, and shifted her gently. And that's when she spoke again. "My baby's coming," she said, barely a whisper. "Please don't leave." He said nothing, but the way his grip shifted firmer, surer. He had no intention of letting go. The sack clung to her skin like confession. Her fingers freed now, pressed lightly to the back of his shirt. She hadn't been held like this since before her husband died. No, it was different. This wasn't love. This was shelter. She didn't know his name. Didn't they know where he was taking her? But as the sun dipped low and the gossip behind them dissolved like dust, she realized something that made her shiver. She wasn't scared. Not of him. Not yet. And from somewhere just beneath her ribs, the baby kicked again, sharp, strong, as if to say, "It's time." And maybe, just maybe, someone had finally come. The wagon rocked gently, each wheel turning like the slow beat of a weary heart. Temperance sat inside, back braced against a sack of oats, legs curled to one side her. The sack still covered her face, but the air had changed. No longer thick with judgment and sweat. Now it carried pine needles and dry bark, the faint smell of creek water somewhere in the near distance. She hadn't spoken again. Not since the words at the auction, "My baby's coming," and the man hadn't spoken either. She didn't know his name, only the weight of his silence, and the way his shoulders filled the front bench of the wagon like he'd grown from the earth itself. Each time she dared lift the edge of a sack for breath, she saw flashes. His broad-back worn denim shirt, wide-brimmed hat dipped low. It was a man shaped by labor and alaniness. But he hadn't let her fall. That mattered more than his name. Baying her eyelids, she tried to piece together what had just happened. Not just the shame of the auction platform, but the months leading to it. The slow unraveling of her world. Her husband, Will Callahan, had died under a freight wagon 6 months into her pregnancy. Gone in an instant. The same night, her name vanished, too. Widow replacing wife, burden replacing daughter-in-law. They buried him and began weighing what use she still had. At first, she'd scrubbed floors, washed linens, bit her tongue. But when they said she must marry Obadiah or be sent back east where her kind belongs, she chose silence over surrender. Obadiah had always looked at her too long. We had once warned him off, half drunk and half joking. She wished now he'd said more. Her baby shifted again. She rubbed her belly gently through the cotton folds of her dress, whispering nothing in particular, just syllables to fill the silence. A tumbrint-sized pain bloomed low in her back. She tried not to wheeze. The wagon slowed. The man grunted low and unreadable as he pulled the reins. The wheels crunched to a halt. She listened. No voices, no town noises, just breeze in the trees. Then his boots hit the dirt. She heard him walk toward the back, then pause. Her hand trembled as she lifted the sack. Light, pale and kind. No crowds, no judgment. They were beside a shallow stream, birches swaying nearby, and a trail leading toward a ridge covered in green. A small cabin stood tucked at the foot of the hill. A stone chimney. One shutter hanging crooked. She blinked against the sun. He looked at her finally. He had the kind of face that didn't ask for anything. Brown eyes, weathered cheekbones, a beard that softened a strong jaw. He wasn't handsome. Not in the way the Callahans had prized, but he was real. He gestured toward the cabin and offered a hand. No words. She hesitated. Then she slid her hand into his, expecting strength and finding care. The pain in her back pulsed again. She gasped, faltering. His arm went around her waist. Not possessive, just enough to keep her standing. She let him guide her across the dirt. Inside the cabin was sparse. A single bed made up with a wool blanket. A rocker near the hearth. One shelf with a cracked Bible and a rusted horseshoe nailed above the door. Dust floated like feathers in the shafts of sunlight. There was no clock ticking, no mirror to judge her. He helped her sit on the bed, brought a ladle of water from a barrel, sat down a folded towel, then he stood in the doorway, watching her with a stillness that made the space breathe differently. She took the cup and drank. Slowly, "You going to tell me your name?" he asked finally. She licked dry lips. Temperance. His brow moved just a little, like he hadn't expected anything so soft-sounding from a woman who'd been treated like livestock. "And you?" she asked. "Cold," he said. She nodded, folding the name into the folds of her mind, like a letter she'd read later. He turned to leave. "Wait," he looked back. Her voice was thinner now, stretched between pain and need. "Why did you do it?" Colt stared at her a long time. Then spoke low like each word had weight. "Because you asked to be seen." Tears stung her eyes before she could stop them. She turned her face toward the fireless hearth. "Es sham." He didn't console her, didn't cross the room, but he placed a loaf of bread on the side table, set down a jar of honey beside it, and walked out. She sat alone for a while, blinking fast. Every room in her life had been full of noise, commands, sermons, threats. This one held only her breath, and that was new. She untied the last bit of rope still knotted around her wrist. Let it fall like a skin shear needed. Outside, she heard Colt splitting wood, reed meek, unurried. Her fingers drifted to her belly. The baby had quieted. She looked down at her ankles, swollen, dust covered, and then at the bread. He had left it without asking, as if she were allowed to eat when she was hungry. The thought alone made her cry again, but this time quietly. The sun tilted lower in the window. The light turned golden. She reached for the bread with shaking hands and broke off a piece. And in the far distance, just beyond the trees, a hawk screamed once. She flinched, but it was only a bird. Still, the sound stirred something in her. A warning, a memory, a fear she couldn't yet name. She stood slowly and walked to the doorway. Colt was splitting wood in the yard, his back to her. Back farther down the slope, behind the ridge, she saw 3 men on horses, small distant shapes, hill, watching, waiting. Her throat tightened. They hadn't come to buy, they'd come to take. The cabin didn't tick. That was the first thing Temperance noticed. No clock on the wall, no pendulum beating time against her nerves, only the soft breath of wind brushing through cracks in the shutters, and the occasional hush of trees swaying outside. Here time passed in shadows and light, in the way fire deepened or cooled on the hearthstones, not in minutes or scoldings. Colt had split enough wood for 3 winters by morning. He stacked it without sound, moving like a man who taught himself to be small in the world despite his size. He didn't ask if she needed help standing or walking or breathing. He didn't comment on how swollen her ankles were or how thin her wrists had grown. He simply placed a fresh basin of warm water near the bed, then left a clean cloth beside it. Temperance sat up slowly, brushing the hair from her face. Her braid had come undone in the night. Her belly strained against the faded seams of her dress. She dreamt of her mother's kitchen. Cinnamon, warm bread, a lace curtain trembling from a window open just enough to whisper comfort. She'd woken instead to aching ribs and a silence that didn't press. That too was new. She dipped the cloth into the basin and washed her face. Her skin was warm and tight. When she looked down, she saw the faint rope burns still etched around her wrists. Pale while soft and angry. They reminded her she was still real. Later, when she stepped outside, Colt didn't startle. He simply looked up from where he was nailing a new board to the coop and offered a nod. The sun caught the edge of his jawline, casting him half in light, half in shadow. His hair was dark, but a streak of silver curled near his temple. His hands, one strong and sure, the other twisted and shiny with scar tissue, worked in rhythm, one compensating for the other without complaint. She watched him work, not out of curiosity, but because the quiet between them wasn't empty. She eased herself onto the rocker near the door, breath shallow. "You ever had someone stay here before?" she asked. Colt didn't look up. No, the way he said it, it wasn't bitter. Used final. Why not? A pause. Then didn't need to. Temperance nadie. The wood creaked under her weight. The baby shifted again. A flutter and a nudge. You could have left me there, she said after a while. Colt didn't answer right away. Then he set the hammer down beside the coop and straightened his spine. You were standing with a sack over your face and rope around your hands. Seemed like leaving wasn't your sin. She turned her face from him, blinking against sudden heat in her eyes. Inside, a breeze stirred the pages of the Bible on the shelf. One fluttered loose and drifted to the floor. Temperance noticed it later. After Colt brought her tea, set it beside her with the gentleness of a man who knew what hot things could do to bare skin. Was it fire, she asked, eyes glancing to his hand. Colt paused, then followed her gaze. Barn accident, he said. Long time ago yours. He shook his head. Someone else's. He got him out. Temperance watched him closely. But it cost you something. Colt didn't deny it. Hughes took a slow sip from his own cup and leaned against the porch beam. So many things are worth the burn. The words settled between them, warm and solemn. By afternoon, clouds had begun to roll over the hills. Not storm dark, but heavy enough to dull the gold in the air. She took to walking the small path behind the cabin, one hand on her belly, the other grazing the tall grasses. She found a line of stones near the tree and, small, rounded, carefully stacked. A child's grave maybe, or a dog's, she didn't ask. Colt didn't follow her, but she knew he watched from the porch, not in suspicion, in something closer to readiness. When the wind shifted, she turned and whispered. I think they'll come. Colt didn't pretend not to know who she meant. You think they'll be fools enough to walk onto your land? They already were, he said, come. Now they'll wait for a time they think I ain't watching. She nodded. Fire didn't rise as high this time. It stayed low like smoke in an old chimney, waiting to stir. At dusk, he lit the lantern. The fire inside flickered against the walls, casting their shadows large across the wooden floor. She sat by the hearth, shelling dried beans into a pot just for the rhythm of it. Her hands remembered this from childhood. Her body remembered how it felt to be part of something quiet. She looked over and caught him watching her. Not her body, not her wounds, but her. The way a man looks when he's trying to piece a picture from broken glass, she said almost without breath. They said I'd shame the family if I gave birth alone. Emit her gas. You're not alone. The lantern popped softly behind them. Outside, a wolf cried once into the dusk. She set down the pot. I don't think they want the baby, she said. I think they just don't want me to have her. Colt didn't answer, but he crossed the room then, slow and sure, and knelt beside the hearth. His burned hand reached out, not to touch her, but to pick up one of the beans she dropped. He set it back in the bowl. You'll have her, he said quietly. And she won't carry their name. Temperance looked at him like a woman seeing spring for the first time after a brutal winter. She didn't know what to say, but her breath trembled as she whispered, You believe that? Colt nodded. Then he added, and when the time comes, if they try again, they'll wish they'd left her alone. The cabin smelled of warm bread and pine smoke by morning. Temperance sat by the open window, her ankles propped on a stool, a damp cloth resting against her neck. The ache in her back had become a dull pulse, steady as a drum beat. The baby had dropped lower overnight. She could feel the difference in her bones. Outside, Colt was hammering fence posts into hard ground, one-handed, quiet as ever. Each swing of the mallet was precise, patient. She watched from behind the lace curtain. Used a strip of old linen Colt had tacked up after seeing her squint at the morning glare. They'd done that without a word. Like the bread he left every dawn, like the way he checked the water barrel before she woke, she'd never had to ask. That not being asked to beg was the most foreign kindness of all. The fire crackled behind her. She turned the loaf over in the cast iron pan, let it brown, let herself breathe. She hadn't felt useful in months, but she still remembered how to bake. Flour, lard, salt, simple things, stubborn as memory. When the knock came, it didn't sound like a neighbor's. 3 sharp raps, then silence. Temperance froze. She glanced to the rifle leaning by the door. Not her doing. Colt had placed it there 2 nights ago without explanation. She hadn't touched it, but she knew where the bullets were. Another knack. Slower, heavier. Colt's shadow moved past the window. She heard the boards creak as he opened the door. Afternoon, said a crisp voice. Male, older, polished like boots before Sunday. Preacher Bill, Colt said flatly. Said a crisp voice. Male, older, polished like boots before Sunday. Preacher Bill, Colt said flatly. Temperance couldn't see him, but she recognized the name. The churchman who dined with the Callahans every third Sabbath. The same man who told her once that submission heals faster than resentment. She stood quietly, both hands bracing her belly. The baby stirred low. She swallowed the tightness rising in her throat. I'm here on behalf of Mrs. Callahan, the preacher said. There's concern. She ain't yours to worry about, Colt replied. Temperance stepped into view. The preacher blinked as if seeing her in a home, dressed, fed, not bowed, offended some theological rule. You're with child, he said unnecessarily. He was with child when they dragged me to market, she answered, his mouth thin. Jure-in-laws say the child may be kin. Temperance held his gaze. Ella have no Callahan name. Temperance, he began using her name like a curse. You must know how this appears. A woman alone with a man unmarried on land that isn't. It's mine, Colt interrupted, stepping forward. The preacher looked up. Colt towered even more in the cramped doorway and frowned. You may think yourself her protector, but you're only giving the town reason to whisper. Colt didn't move. Temperance reached out and placed one hand on the doorframe to steady herself. Let them whisper, she said. I've been quiet too long. The preacher cleared his throat, uneasy. There's law. We can send for Judge Hanley. Arrange a hearing. Judge Hanley sat at the auction, Colt said. Didn't blink. This isn't about the past. It's about what's proper now, about decency.